Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Alex Moyle here, founder of the Recruiting Gym for another Learning Live. Now, today is a special Learning Live, where most of our Learning Lives take place privately within our community. Today we're making our Learning Live open to everybody. And that's because we're talking about a topic that absolutely every business owner is interested in. We're talking about, is someone going to buy my business so I can sit at home and watch the cricket, do the gardening, and live the life of Riley? But we're all working towards that aim. Most business owners, to be fair, are working towards that aim. But how many achieve it? What are the stepping stones you've got to do to achieve it? And ultimately, how are you valued? They're going to value that business. Today, I'm joined by Tom McCarthy from Orbis Partners, who are a corporate finance firm who support a lot of buyers and sellers in the recruiting industry. Now, before I introduce Tom, what I'm going to ask is, remember, the whole point of Learning Lives is they're meant to be interactive. So please ask questions as and when you get them, and we can make sure we make Tom earn his lunch. So hi, Tom, how are you doing?
Well, Alex, thanks very much for having me.
Good. And so, Tom, just before we get started, tell us a little bit about your experience in corporate finance and what your sort of qualifications are in recruitment to be able to help agencies with buying or selling a business.
Sure. So if I talk first a very little bit about Orbis Partners, we're a firm based in Birmingham, but operate across the whole country. We're part of an international network of independent corporate finance firms. And we help both buyers and sellers or management teams to deliver transactions. Now, that could be helping to sell, it could be helping to acquire, it could be helping to raise the finance to grow a business, to acquire another company, or to lead a management buyout. Most of the deals we do tend to be somewhere in the region of 5 to 50 million, but we will do bigger deals than that, and we will do the odd smaller one as well. We operate across a number of different sectors with particular specializations in business services, including recruitment, food and drink manufacturing, TMT, and healthcare and the like. But business services and specifically recruitment is what we're going to talk about today. From a personal point of view, I think I've got a bit of an insight into recruitment as I started out post-university working in recruitment, and in fact worked with Alex for 3 years at Robert Half. And so it's a pleasure working with Alex, and he taught me a load. So that got me off to a really good start.
3 years, was it that long? Frighteningly, that was probably 15 years ago now.
Plus, sadly.
Oh, God, dear.
Yeah. And I love my time in recruitment. I was working for Robert Half, so placing accountants, be it from sort of bookkeeper level through to finance director. But a number of the placements I made were for people in corporate finance. And it piqued my interest. And so I started learning more about it and decided actually that was the career that I wanted to follow. So having had 3 great years with Robert Half, I'd done pretty well, saved some work up, so resigned on really good terms, but with the prospect of going out to find myself a job. So my job for the next few months was to find a job within corporate finance, which I did. And that was 15 plus years ago. So since that point, I've been helping business owners to sell their company and working through there. And 15 plus years later, here I am at Orbis.
Fantastic. Well, we've got lots to get through in the next 30 minutes, and we'll probably get some questions too. So the first question we've got on the slate, Tom, which is just a lot of times everyone thinks about they know how a business is valued, but could you just run us through the sort of fundamentals of how an agency is valued? When someone comes to you and goes, "Hey, I want to sell," how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, sure. So with valuations, the old cliche is it's what someone will sell for and what someone will buy for, but there is a bit of science and a bit of thought and some generally agreed ways that that one can get a feel for value, be it on the buy side or the sell side. Most businesses are valued on a multiple of profitability, typically EBITDA, which is an acronym which stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. What EBITDA gives you is a sort of a proxy for cash and for cash generation. So buyers, if they're on the buy side, can get, by analysing the historic performance of the business, can get enough feel for what cash generation is, and through some decent, robust forecasts, they can get a feel for what the business is going to generate over the coming years. and as a result of that, do some analysis on what the return on investment will be for them, and therefore what they're willing to pay for it.
Okay.
So there's a couple of different terms that are used within the industry. So enterprise value, you can see there is highlighted in blue, is in simplistic terms, it's the underlying EBITDA times a multiple. First things first, what do I mean by underlying? Many, and I'd probably say most business owners run the business to an extent to for their personal interests. So it may be that they don't pay themselves a particularly high salary, but take the majority as dividends. It may be that some businesses we see have spouses or relatives getting remuneration for the business, but not particularly contributing to it. What we need to do when we're starting to analyze a business is work out what is the true underlying performance of a business and what is its true EBITDA. So in one of the instances that I've given there, perhaps the owner is paying themselves PAYE, a relatively modest amount, but taking the majority as dividend. Do we need to look at that business and add back in some extra cost to put in, say, an MD or a general manager? And will that give us our true representative profitability of the business, with it being run under management by a new owner? There's lots of arguments to and fro on that side of things, but I think the important thing to do if you're in the planning stage on the sell side of a deal is just to try and be as objective and realistic as possible to understand what sort of resource you need in your business for it to be run properly under management once you as the shareholder stroke owners have left the company.
Right. So if you don't have a branch manager, you sort of think, well, I'd probably have to pay 160K. So you sort of factor that in as a cost and then go, actually, I was making 200, but it'd be 140 once I added in a branch manager or a sales director.
That's the principle that we're talking about.
Okay, cool.
And it could well be the other way, that actually, as a owner shareholder, you're actually paying yourself too much and you need to take some off. But that's the principle. It's a case of someone like ourselves coming in, analysing the business, challenging the owners to understand truly what's the underlying performance of this business.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that gives us the overview, but we've got a few circles on the page here. So what do these all mean?
Yeah, so what we're trying to build here is shareholder value. Getting the maximum headline price for the business is very much a goal, but really the critical thing is what is going into the seller's back pocket post-deal. So post-tax, post-fees, how do we maximise shareholder value? So tax planning, I'm not going to focus on too much today, but there are various different plans and processes one can put in place well before you decide to sell the business to ensure that you're maximising the potential of entrepreneurs relief, which is effectively a relief which means that the capital gain is reduced and that an effective tax rate of 10% is paid.
So even if you're thinking of selling in, say, 4 or 5 years, you need to be thinking about how everything's structured today to minimise the liability at the point that you sell.
Absolutely, and that's specifically picking up on tax, but what you've just mentioned there is going to be a recurring theme that we talk about throughout the course of the next 20 odd minutes or so, which is preparation, putting the building blocks in place, and starting with the end in mind. I stole this phrase off someone a little while back, but think of the phrase they used was picture yourself and use back from the future, not to the future, but back from the future. So what's the end result you want to get to in terms of an exit? What does that look like? And start working your way backwards so you can put a process and a plan in place.
Right, okay.
Some of those points we'll come on to in a little bit more detail in a second.
Okay, cool. So next,
tax planning then, we're not going to focus on too much today. Financial performance, then in an ideal scenario, you'll be going into a sale with a few good years, typically 3 good years of profitability and growth under the belt, and showing a business that is improving, increasing, growing, and is of sound financial performance, both from a P&L perspective, but also with a strong balance sheet. We'll talk about some ideas on that in a second as well. But that financial performance, what it really comes down to is what is that underlying EBITDA and how do we maximize that? Because the fundamentals of the valuation are that EBITDA figure applied to a multiple. What influences the multiple? We've got a couple of slides on in a moment. And then the final part is deal structure. I think many people on the call will probably have heard of friends, colleagues, competitors who have sold a business and the headline price looks terrific, but they get a certain amount on day one and the remainder is either deferred or structured as an earnout, or perhaps even there's payable in shares.
Right.
All of those things can work out very well, but the key point is there's risk associated with anything that is not cash in your back pocket. So just evaluate that at the point of, before embarking on a sale, because there are some things you can do to try and mitigate the amount that is left off the table. And then at the same time, just evaluating that risk at the point of agreeing and negotiating a deal.
I think the challenge is that if it's your business and you've got earn out, you've got to work in someone else's business and see them do things to your business for 2 years. That's potentially quite a tough ask, I imagine.
It can be very painful, and it can go wrong. So there's risks around it. However, what I should say, in a people type business where you're not purchasing tangible assets per se, it is a factor that does come back again and again, and it is something that is pretty common with deals, particularly if there's a gap in valuation expectations.
I guess the key is that the closer your business is able to run without you, the shorter that handover period will be.
So it's all about mitigating risks. So what we're going to talk about in a bit is how do we make things as easy as possible for the buyer, and how do we mitigate that risk.
And so multiple, are we going to talk more about multiple, or can I ask you a couple of questions about multiple now?
Let's do it now. There's a couple of points we can probably come to later on as well, but fire away.
So everyone talks about the multiple. So what are the drivers that influence that multiple, sort of that push it up or push it down?
Yeah. Can we flick on to the next slide, Alex, please?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No worries. I'm on it. There we go. Right. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to zoom up. Do you want to go to the top bit first, Tom, or do you want to go to the second bit?
Yeah. Let's start top left, and we'll work our way around.
Cool. Okay. Great.
So this isn't an exhaustive list, but it does give a bit of a visual feel for some of the levers that you as a business owner can draw on, both in the run up to a sale, but also levers that you can try to play with during the negotiation as well. I'm not going to go through all of these points, but let's make an assumption. There's sort of 4 key areas, being financial, commercial, the market, and operational. On the financial side of things, I'll just pick out MI for starters, which is management information. With any business sale, but particularly something that is people-based, that's tech-based or intangible-based, then a buyer is purchasing historical performance, which they hope is an indication of future performance. And the only way they're going to get a feel for that is good quality management information and KPIs. So in the lead up to a sale, and this is just good business discipline anyway, really work on the monthly management accounts and the KPIs and the information that you're producing as a business. Now, as a recruitment business, it is one of those metric-led businesses. So I hope and expect that most people on this call have a very clear understanding of the type of metrics which will influence of their business and provide a clear indication of what results will be. But if not, start developing a board pack that draws out the key drivers and the key performance indicators within your company.
And I guess things like that are top spend clients, like client retention rates. Because I guess and if you run a temp business, it's things like average assignment length, average margin, things that sort of give people visibility of how quickly does that business's client base turnover, and how much are you exposed to one particular business or one particular sector.
Precisely, and focus on the like of margin. On a balance sheet item, your cash management, your working capital management as well, understanding debt metrics and covenants, but I'm going to try to mainly focus on the profit and loss side of things. So really understanding what drives that growth, profitability and margin.
So does that mean if I'm running the business as a lifestyle business at the moment, I'm probably taking a lot of cash out of the business? So if I take too much cash out, would that affect the multiple, because people feel it will look like it's only just surviving, where the reality is I'm milking it as we go? Not
so much, because you can demonstrate where that cash is going and what it's being used for, and how you run your business is fine. But if we come on to a little bit of tax planning, and this will come into deal structures in a moment as well, if you're in the run up to a business and you don't personally need the money, then try and keep the cash in the business, because there are tax advantages to selling the cash as part of the overall deal. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a second.
Okay.
Forecast is one of the next ones. If hopefully it's just part of business discipline, the guys on the call are working on budgets and forecasts and have a strategic plan that links up from a board level position, but also is fed down through the business so that everyone within the company knows where what the key strategic aims of the business are. But if you're selling a business, last year's performance is all well and good. But what's happening right now? What's happening in the next 6 months? What's happening in the next 12 to 18 months? Really, you want to be selling on current and future run rates, if at all possible. And the only way you're going to convince any sort of buyer to put some credence in those forecasts is if you've got several years worth of forecasts that you can demonstrate how they were put together, what the assumptions were, how they performed against budget, and therefore it gives more credibility in the current budget that you're using to sell the business.
Right. Okay. It's a bit like showing someone like the plans of the house and all the certificates of the house, so they realise it's been built properly, rather than just saying, "Trust me, it's going to stand up."
Precisely. Let's say you're a buyer looking at a business and the forecast looks fantastic. This is the first forecast that the business has ever produced. What sort of reliability, what sort of credibility do you give that? So give yourselves as owners as much chance to convince and persuade about what the future performance of the business looks like by having several years worth of forecasts. That'll help you also test your budgeting assumptions in the years running up to it to make sure that your budgeting process and your assumptions are robust at the point of leading into a sale.
Okay, cool. So should we move over to some of the commercial sort of bits that we might want to think about?
Yeah, so building brand and intellectual property, key driver within recruitment valuations. Some of the things that you can try and use to demonstrate brand. Sorry, go on.
Really build intellectual property, given what they do is place candidates.
Good point. I'm talking more about brand here. So a measure of brand, or a way of indicating what brand might be, would be low levels of both churn of team, but also of client base as well. So it's showing that you're a quality outfit, that you can retain both good quality, high talented people, and also the customer base as well. Right.
Okay. So that builds part of the value of the business. If you can retain staff or you retain clients, people value that more.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to talk about is, with this whole dial, there isn't one thing that is the silver bullet. It's more of a Kaizen approach of incremental changes to as many of these different facets as possible, which all then help solidify and build the overall multiple.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
A question from Steve in a minute. We're gonna get you to narrow down to two of these, but keep on talking through the ones you've got at the moment.
Yeah, so customer quality, I won't spend too much time on, because it's a fairly obvious point. But if you're dealing with prestigious brands, then it has an indication of what sort of quality of an outfit you are as well. Risk analysis and concentration and dependency, I'll try and put into one basket, seeing as we're just pushing on with time. So if a business, 60, 78% of it is with one client or just a couple of clients, then clearly there's a risk that if those clients go away for whatever reason, the foundations of the business are going to get whipped out from under them. So try and ensure that there's no dependency on a particular client or particular markets even, or looking at it internally, a dependence on you, the owner, or a dependence on a very small number of star billers. So it's just trying to minimize risk and spread or minimize dependency in as many areas of the business as possible.
So is that why often like startup businesses depend heavily on top billers, and then sort of years 4 and 5, as they get bigger, their focus is on actually getting more people billing 100 than getting one person billing 400, because that big biller is actually quite a big flight risk, and therefore do they sort of discount that person leaving when they potentially buy the business?
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone on the call will have known someone, a top biller in a firm, who's gone off and set up on their own, and so there's key risk in that area. So try and diversify. Of course, you want to encourage your best people, but it's about recruiting and retaining a pool of talent.
And I guess an example of a USP is that I know a couple of agencies that are actually involved in training talent. So they take graduates, train them to become clinical testers, and then place them with clients.
Yeah.
I know of one client, they go to Vietnam to recruit candidates and then facilitate the relocation and all the visa process. So is it those things where they're moving beyond just the traditional pick up a job, place a job that buyers are looking for, where they're sort of looking to expand the business model or find new niches in that?
There's nothing wrong with standard recruitment if it's done well to a professional level and there's consistency and there's visibility of revenues. You do find that specializations, be that in a particular niche or just having a particular bit of value add, can help bump a multiple though.
Right. Okay. And we may be looking at this minute. Does the difference? Is there a difference between temp and perm on a multiple?
So on the dial on the right hand side, one of the points is revenue visibility. So this applies to recruitment. It just applies to businesses in general. You generally get more confidence in the earnings ability and therefore the future EBITDA of a business if you've got sticky revenues. And so temp business by its very nature has greater visibility than a fully perm business, which is job to job to job to job at the start of each month.
Okay.
It's making it happen. Whereas clearly you've got a underlying recurring base within the temp business. Yes, some can drop off, but you've got that core which has the continuity, and that visibility does help with multiples. The ideal really is that you've got a bit of a mix, and sort of the magic mix is half and half, 60-40, temp to perm tends to be quite an attractive mix to buyers because you have a combination of a bit of solidity of revenues, but a full temp business will often have a decent chunk of debt in there, perhaps invoice finance and the like, which does feed into valuation, and we'll come on to that in a second. So there is a bit of a balancing act to be played. I suppose, sounding like a bit of a lawyer and putting caveats in place, it really does depend though on who the buyer is, who your market is when you're trying to prepare the business for that sale, and understanding who the likely buyers are as well.
Right. And does it make a difference if your client base is public sector? So if I'm placing in healthcare or I'm placing in schools, a better multiple because it's the government and you're guaranteed to get paid and they're unlikely to get an internal recruitment team, or does it work against you?
Looking at the healthcare market at the moment, it's really quite heating up. I know a couple of years back, caps were put in place, and so you can have legislation working within the public sector that can suddenly have an adverse effect on particular niches within it. But if you look at it from a revenue point of view, the government is never going to go bust, and so there is a degree of comfort around that.
Okay, great. So let's time is ticking on. So we've got the bottom two quarters here.
Yeah, let's whiz through these. So the market outlook and M&A. As a business owner, you can't do anything to influence either of these, so it comes much more down to a timing point, which is just keeping your ear to the ground and making sure that you're prepared to jump into a sale by having your management information ready, by preparing a data room, which we haven't really talked about too much, but essentially a full folder of all the details of the business, which are ready to put out. Say you get a knock on the door from a particular buyer, or you do decide that the market is particularly hot and you want to go to market pretty quickly. Having all of that information to hand, ready to go, just shows discipline and will allow buyers to do their diligence quickly and efficiently, so you can take advantage of it. And then coming around the left-hand side, on the operational side of things, quite a few of these points come back to how dependent is the business on the owner. So a key job as an owner, particularly in the run-up to a sale, is make yourself redundant. The less the business is dependent on you, the likelihood is the higher the multiple, but secondly, in terms of deal structure, the better chance you're giving yourself of securing the maximum amount of cash on day one and minimizing any risk of a deferred payment or earn-out payment.
Okay.
So it's about developing your second tier of management, ensuring that they are driving the business strategically and operationally. Could be that you put things in place like EMI options, that the second tier of key people can benefit from a future sale, because tying them in with those options does ensure that everyone is strategically going in the same direction and they have a vested interest in maximizing the value of the business as well.
Okay, that's good to know. You're not going to talk about compliance, are you?
Not if you don't want me to.
Oh, everyone hates compliance. Recruiters don't want to do compliance. That's you're not going to say that has an influence in whether people want to buy my business or not.
Well, yes, but also as part of the sale, you're going to be signing a series of warranties. So essentially truths about the business that you are compliant with XYZ, be it IR35 or GDPR. And if you haven't got your GDPR in particular in order, then lawyers are particularly hot on that at the moment because the financial penalties can be pretty crippling. So if you haven't got all that in order, and you state that you have as part of the legal documentation, then potentially the buyer has an opportunity to come back at you and take some of that money back.
Right. Okay.
So
Cool.
get your house in order.
Cool. Okay. No worries. No worries. Well, that's there's a lot to there's a lot to it there. So if we were to just sort of go back a second. So what are some of the things that business owners can do to plan for exit?
Yeah. So a lot of it, sadly, is rather dull and it's process based. So learn to love your data. What drives your business? How do you measure that? How do you record it? How do you share that through organization? How do you and how will you present that to buyers at some point in the future? Start cataloging it, filing it, making it part of your monthly reporting pack. Get your governance systems in place. Start removing yourself as much as you can do from the business so that you decrease dependency on you. If possible, keep cash in the business so that you can sell it as part of the transaction when it comes to it. And start talking to, sadly, people like me at an early stage so that you can start putting your plans in place. Someone like me can help identify who buyers are, who's active in the market at the moment, what's driving value, what can we do over a 1 to 3 year period to help put that process and strategy in place.
What I would say, Tom, is one of the things you mentioned there was like remove yourself from the business. My only sort of caveat to that is that remove yourself at the point the business is ready for you to not do that. I've seen on a number of occasions where the business owner's so keen for a sale or for the quality of life that they withdraw themselves too fast.
Yeah.
And effectively, the business doesn't have the momentum or critical mass to survive on its own.
Yeah.
And so very much sort of like you would give your children responsibility, before, and you're letting it go little bit by little bit, but you're never that far away from picking it back up.
Yeah.
With a view, you've got 3 or 4 years to get it up and running, because otherwise you can end up having to go back in harder and lose a few years in the process as well.
Couldn't agree more. It's really easy for me to give these broad statements. The reality is there's always nuance, there's always grey in this, and it's a matter of the business owner understanding their team, their environment, their culture, what they do, and making that decision.
Okay, and what would you say are what are some pitfalls that people need to avoid when they're thinking about sort of setting their business up for sale or selling the business?
Yeah, I think being unprepared would be the main thing. Having unrealistic expectations on valuation would be another.
Unrealistic expectations. Why would as a business owner my expectations be unrealistic?
Because the vast majority of people think, sadly, the business is worth more than it actually is. And that's because they haven't invested time in a planning process and worked out what's going in the market, perhaps spoken with someone like me in my sort of field who can give them some objective advice as to what's good, bad, or indifferent about their business on day one. That's the time to be having the potentially disappointing discussion about valuation, not 2 weeks before you've decided you're going to pull the trigger and start a process.
And I guess it's a bit like your house, is that you put all your energy and effort into decorating it. But if you've decorated it how you like it, not everyone's going to like that. And so people might factor in a redecoration, even though you love it, they might not.
Yeah.
And also because you've invested so much time and energy in it, you're hoping to get paid for the emotion that you've put into the business, where most people are just buying the people and the customers.
Sadly, yes. I mean, one of the great things, but one of the tricky things of working with owner managers, which is what I do day in, day out. And it is one of the things that I do like. This isn't just a transaction. This is someone's life work in many instances, or it's 5, 10, 15 years worth of work. So it is blood, sweat, tears. So that is something that I and sort of people who operate in my size of the market are acutely aware of, but it doesn't make it any easier. And there are sometimes those tough decisions to be had, or tough conversations that need to be had as well. Try, and this is one of the things that is easy to say and very difficult to actually bring to pass. Try and be objective, try and be unemotive, and try and be rational about the sales process, about what you're trying to achieve.
Okay, and how big does my agency have to be before I can start thinking about selling it?
I've done deals sort of in the early days from a couple of $100,000 upwards. So there's often a buyer out there, but it's at what point really can you start attracting some scale and trying to get a good auction process going. I think if you can demonstrate a business that is doing 500,000 EBITDA upwards, then you've got to the point where you do have something of scale there, and it's round about there. But particularly if you get to a sort of 1 million plus, just by the nature and size of a business doing that sort of size and scale, then the owner will have had to have pulled themselves back a little bit. To get to that sort of size, you'll have to be a class outfit. You'll have to have brand recognition. You'll have to be well known in your market. You'll have to be able to attract good talent. So it's almost that the size and scale it's almost a circular debate, if you like, that one feeds the other. So I don't think there is a cut-off point. But what is clear is that scale does help push the multiple.
Right, and I guess that's because by the virtue of that, it makes as it gets bigger, the owner is less important, and the less important, the more people are going to be interested that they can buy it and run it just like the owner does, as opposed to them leaving and all the clients leaving with them.
Yes, yeah. So compared to things like PLCs, so when trying to work out what is a multiple, there are a number of ways of doing it. One, you can look at similar transactions in similar sectors. And there's all manner of databases that people like I can use to try and pull that data. So you can get a bit of a feel for range there, but you can also look at PLCs. How are they valued by the market? And PLCs will invariably have a slightly larger multiple, enterprise value to EBITDA multiple, than a lot of the private transactions, because they do have that size, that scale, that recognition, that brand, diversified customer base. But plus, they're also on a liquid market, so you can buy and sell the shares freely, whereas clearly that isn't the case easily with a private transaction.
Okay, and so if I was at a situation where I had a business that was delivering 500,000 EBITDA, what would the process need to be for me to consider beginning that sale process?
Yep, there's a slide, Alex, number 4.
Okay, yeah, I'll just share that now. There we are. Yeah. Right. Okay. Go ahead.
So first things first, start talking to people that know the market and who specialise in transactions nice and early. What they will help, or someone like me will do, is help review the business, look at the pros, the cons in the business. Are there some issues that we need to address prior to going to market? It's often helpful to have a similar sort of process with the lawyers that you use. If they're good commercial corporate lawyers, they'll be able to do things like reviewing your legal compliance, your contracts, any employment issues, and just ensuring that any gremlins in the system are tackled before you start the process. Secondly, can help with valuing the business today and working out where we're trying to get to and map out a plan to get from A to B. Also give you guidance on who's active in the market right now, what sort of multiples are being paid, what sort of elements or areas can you focus on to try and drive value. So that's the preparation going to market column on the left-hand side. And that can be as short as a couple of months, but we work on engagements where that can be a planned process over a 3-year period. Say we're getting a business from EBITDA of £1 million with a target to getting to 2-3 million in that period, and it's only at that point that we'll trigger the process and get out to the market.
Okay.
During that phase as well, it's critical, you can also evaluate what other options are there open to me. We focused very much on trade purchases, trade acquisitions at the moment, but there are a whole raft of other things that you can have a look at. And actually, Alex, if you just quickly skim down to slide 5, I'm not going to stay too long on this one.
Yeah.
For everyone listening, we'll get these slides sent out to you, or you can access them afterwards, so you can go into a bit more detail. But there's a few different types of transaction there, which have got pros and cons against all of them. So the number of ticks is clearly the strongest. The more ticks, the better for a particular column or box. So trade sale, we can see that in all likelihood, you're probably going to maximise your pounds and pence by selling to a competitor, or not a competitor, sorry, to a trade buyer. And you'll probably get the most cash on day one, but you'll be in all likelihood selling the majority of your shares, if not all of them, so you won't benefit from too much future growth. It's pretty tax effective because of the current tax legislation around entrepreneurs relief, and it'll give the best chance of a clean exit from the business. On the downside, you won't maintain your independence, be selling to another player within the market, perhaps a larger corporate, and confidentiality. NDAs we put in place and a structure and a process we put in place, but at some point you need to open the doors, open the books to someone else in your marketplace. So it can be a bit disruptive, and it can, well, certainly you have to at some point show someone else the inner workings of your business. Okay. You can compare that to other things like a management buyout, where you can get pretty close on valuation, but you'll probably have to defer more of the value and more of the consideration. Can still be pretty tax effective. May or may not give a full exit from the business. It may be that you get a certain amount today, but carry on working for a couple of years and gradually phase your way out. So pros and cons around all of those. Probably one to just leave for now, and we can come back seeing as we are a little pressed for time.
Okay.
So we were just going back to the process. If we go back to slide 4.
Yeah.
So typically we'll work on a restricted marketing process. So we're not going to all and sundry. We'll have a short list of targeted buyers, which someone like us will have researched. We'll make confidential approaches to them. Once they've gone through a confidentiality process, we can start feeding them and drip feeding them bits of information on the business in a tailored fashion to generate indicative thoughts on offer, work out if we're going to spend more time with them or not. We'll put in an auction process so that interested parties need to put a bid in by X date. And through that, you can drive competitive bidding, force up the value of the valuation, and get to a point where you're choosing a preferred party. At that point, you'll often, but not always, grant some exclusivity for them to do some due diligence and a 2 to 3 month process to actually close the deal from agreeing heads of terms through to completion.
Okay. Wow. So I guess that's why it pays to have everything up and running, because you don't want the process dragging on for too long once the wheels get moving.
Absolutely. So for a number of reasons. One, you want to have heat under the buyers. And the only way that you can do that is if you're organised and you're driving the process and you're calling the shots. But secondly, more time spent on a process, inevitably stuff can go wrong. So there were a bunch of businesses, I'm not talking specifically recruitment, that were just on the cusp of spelling around about June 2016. Referendum vote comes out and something completely outside of their control completely influences their lives, their livelihoods and their plans.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Well, we're sort of at time, Tom, and I know we could go on at this, and I guess customer demand and member demand, we can do this again. I did get one question from Steve, and so I'm going to put it on, and he said, what are the 2 most important factors for ensuring maximum value and saleability?
I would say being organised, because that allows you to drive and run a tough, focused auction process, and competition does have a huge impact on value.
And organised means you've got your KPIs, you've got your data, you've got your client retention stats, you've got your speed to productivity of consultant stats and all that sort of stuff.
And you can package that all up. There you go, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Here's the information. Analyse your heart out. We are rock solid on all of the information we've given you. Here's the science behind it. And actually, because of all the work we've done on prior year's forecasting, we know that next year forecast, we're going to deliver that, if not better. And therefore, you need to be paying a premium for this because our run rate is going through the roof.
Right. Okay. So that's the first thing.
That's one. And I'd say probably with the type of people-focused business we're talking about as well. And I don't know the size and scale of the guys on the webcast today, but owner dependency, no matter what sector I'm dealing with, is a key factor. So try and be disciplined. It's very easy to say, recruit the right team, incentivize them, bring them in as part of the plans if appropriate, and start distancing yourself from the business and start making yourself redundant.
So that links to something Richard just said, which is how much of the value is down to talent and a competent leadership team to maintain business continuity. What you're basically saying is no owner, leadership team that can run it when the owner's not there, life is good.
Yeah, I mean, with a recruitment business in particular, without the talent and the leadership, what hope have you got of retaining top quality clients and providing that visibility of revenues, and also what hope have you got of retaining the best talent in the tiers below those guys? So if you get that bit wrong, you're starting to creak. Right.
Okay. That's good. Well, hopefully that answered your question, Richard and Steve. Well, we're at 40 minutes. Normally our goal for the Recruiting Gym shows is 30, but on some occasions we go to 40. Tom, you've been fantastic. I know you're on LinkedIn, so it's Tom McCarthy from Orbis Partners. Orbis Partners you can find on LinkedIn as well. If you, I'm going to send you a review of the show, and what I'll do is I'll put Tom's email in the review of the show. So if you want a copy of the slides, then Tom will send you a copy of the slides. John said, "Is there any luck on my question?" I'm just trying to see, what question did you ask, John? Oh, so there was a John about where is more questions have just popped in. Sorry, Tom.
Oh, yeah.
All right, there we are. Right, John.
Yeah, critical question. Cheers, John.
What's the average multiplier in the current market for an SME business, and how does that differ from temp and perm?
Okay. So one of the things, Alex, if you can send a link, we've done a review of 2018 M&A market within the recruitment sector within the UK, and looking at both PLCs and then discounting them a bit to reflect the private market, but also looking at disclosed deal values. 5 to 7 times is the average range. Now, within that, the split between temp to perm, it's difficult to split it out further, but my suggestion is that the higher end of that is going to have a nice mix of some temp business, so you do get that visibility as well. There are some important things which will be on the slides that we sent out as well, in terms of how debt plays a role in the businesses, in business valuation as well, but I think we're probably running out of time a little bit on that one. And what I'd say, just as a general comment, is if anyone wanted to pick up the phone and go through things just on an individual basis, I'm really happy to do that.
Yeah, because Luke asked, why is invoice discounting classified as debt? Isn't it working capital?
There is somewhat of a debate about that, but someone at some point is eventually going to have to pick up the tab for that debt. It will really need to be repaid. So I have heard, and I've never seen it, but I have heard of people being able to shift that over to buyers without it being treated as debt, but I've not seen it in my time. And so if you find that buyer out there that are willing to do it, bite their hand off.
Right. And I guess with the multiples, if you're in a higher margin, higher level contract business, that's going to give you a bigger multiple than being lower level, lower margin, shorter assignment lengths, sort of temp business.
In all likelihood, it will come back down to predictability, visibility, and actually just stronger margin is a better place to be.
Right. Well, Tom, you've been fantastic. I'll send everyone out a video of this show probably by Monday, and I'll put your email address on it. I'm sure there'll be some people in touch. And if you can send out the slides to everyone that responds, that would be great. Sure. And everything else you've got. So thank you very much, Tom. It's been fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you very much to all the guests. It's been great to have you on as well. And we will see you all soon. So don't forget to check us out in the recruiting gym. We're doing a show on Monday for consultants, which is how to book client meetings. So very different from selling your business, but a key part of getting your team to do that in order to help you sell your business. So give us a call if you want to chat. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Alex.